It always begins quietly, not with fireworks, not with a speech, not with slamming doors. It begins with a woman who has finally grown tired of explaining herself to someone who was never really listening. For years, she has filled the spaces between his silences, softened the edges of his ego, carried the emotional weight of two. She has bent without breaking, until one day she simply stops. She doesn't scream. She doesn't beg. She doesn't threaten. She just pulls her energy back, and he feels it like a sudden cold wind. The same man who once shrugged off her kindness now wonders where it went. The same man who took her warmth for granted suddenly finds himself staring at the absence of it, replaying old moments in his head like a man searching for a lost drug. Because that's what power feels like when it shifts. Ignoring a man, not from bitterness but from strength, is not about silence. It's about disrupting his reality. You are no longer a constant in the background of his life. You become a void he can't control, a silence that doesn't break when he snaps his fingers. And for a man whose ego has been fed for years, that silence is louder than any words you could ever say. At 50, a woman carries a kind of presence that is forged through fire, the fire of heartbreak, disappointment, resilience, and rebirth. She has nothing to prove, no performance left to give. She knows who she is. And when that kind of woman goes quiet, men listen in ways they never did before, because this isn't a game. This is power, real power, the kind that doesn't demand as it withdraws, and that withdrawal, it's addictive, not because it's cruel, but because it exposes the truth. He never chased because you weren't worthy. He never chased because he thought he already had you. But now, he'll chase like an addict, not for attention, but for the warmth he thought was permanent, until it wasn't. It begins the moment you stop trying. For years, you've carried conversations, filled silence with softness, offered comfort when he pulled away, and gave warmth even when he gave you coldness in return. You've leaned in, and he's leaned out. You've made it easy, and he's made it complicated. But then something shifts. One day, without anger, without grand announcements, you simply stop feeding the connection. You let silence stand on its own 2 feet. You let space breathe. You ignore, not as a weapon but as power. And that's when it happens. The man who once took your presence for granted starts to feel the ache of your absence. The truth is simple. People value what they have to reach for. What's always available becomes invisible. What stands firm becomes magnetic. This is not about playing games. This is about psychological gravity. And no one understood this better than Carl Jung. Jung believed that the human psyche is ruled by unconscious forces. The shadow, the ego, the archetypes that shape our behavior even when we think we're in control. And here's the paradox most women over 50 never hear. When you stop giving your energy to someone who doesn't deserve it, you don't lose power. You reclaim it. And that reclamation is intoxicating. Let's be honest. At this stage of your life, you've already learned how fragile some men's egos are. You've seen how they chase what they can't fully have and lose interest in what they think they've already conquered. You've given and given and given. But what if the key was never giving more? What if the secret to making him chase you like an addict is found in your refusal to be easily available? When a man feels ignored by a woman he once assumed would always be there, something primal awakens inside him. It's not just desire, it's ego, it's control, it's shadow work. His mind doesn't say, she's ignoring me. It whispers, why am I not enough to hold her attention? And that question burns. It doesn't matter if he's 25 or 55. The male ego has one fundamental weakness. It craves validation, especially from the woman it once felt secure with. When that validation disappears, it's like oxygen being cut off. He may act unbothered at first. He may even pull back further, trying to appear detached. But make no mistake, your silence will echo louder than your words ever did. Here's what most people misunderstand. Ignoring a man isn't about playing ice queen. It's about anchoring your energy back to yourself. You stop chasing closure. You stop explaining. You stop trying to prove your worth. And in doing so, you awaken something far more powerful than his affection, his instinct. At 50, you hold a kind of presence that younger women are still learning to embody. You've lived. You've lost. You've learned the hard way that real power doesn't need to scream. Real power withdraws. It stands tall in silence. It chooses itself. And here's where the psychology deepens. Jung's concept of the animus, the masculine psychological energy that exists inside every woman, becomes fully alive in women who stop centering men. When you ignore him the right way, you don't just remove your attention from him. You reclaim your inner masculine energy. You become whole. And nothing is more magnetic than a woman who is whole without needing him. He begins to feel it before he fully understands it. Your energy shifts. You're no longer performing, bending, or proving. You become unpredictable, and that's dangerous to the male ego. You're no longer orbiting around his attention, and suddenly he starts orbiting around yours. This is the same man who once dismissed your needs, the same man who answered texts on his terms, the same man who thought your love was a constant. But now, he's the one replaying old conversations in his head. He's the one checking your online status. He's the one wondering why your energy feels gone. What he doesn't know is this. Your silence is not emptiness. It's a boundary, a mirror, a test. The male psyche is wired to respond to scarcity. When you step out of his spotlight, you become the very thing his shadow can't control. And nothing triggers obsession more than losing control over what once felt safe. So no, ignoring a man isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's a psychological reset. And when done with quiet power, it can make even the most emotionally detached man turn into someone who craves your presence like an addict. Craves their next high. This is not about manipulation. It's about breaking the pattern that once drained you. It's about shifting the power dynamic from desperation to sovereignty. Because the truth is, a woman who knows how to walk away without slamming the door is unforgettable. Now let's go deeper. Why does ignoring a man have such a potent psychological effect, especially when you're a woman over 50? Because it strikes directly at the center of his ego. For decades, society has told men that they are the prize, that women are the ones who must hold their attention, fight for their love, keep the spark alive. Many men unconsciously absorb this narrative. They don't even question it. They walk through life assuming your warmth is permanent. But here's the twist. Men who live in ego are not prepared for a woman who is no longer performing for their approval. When you ignore him, his unconscious mind doesn't just feel rejected, it feels dethroned. There's a difference between ignoring out of bitterness and ignoring out of power. The first one says, "I'm hurt and I want you to notice me." The second one says, "I've remembered who I am." And it is the second that makes him spiral. This spiral is rooted in a psychological principle Jung explored often, the shadow. Every man carries a shadow, the parts of himself he hides, denies, or doesn't understand. When your attention vanishes, his shadow is forced to surface. All the insecurities he covered with charm, with control, with power begin to whisper, "She doesn't need me. She's slipping away. Why isn't she reacting like before?" This is where the addiction loop begins. When someone is addicted to a substance, a feeling, or a person, the most powerful trigger is absence. It's not the high itself that creates obsession, it's the withdrawal. He becomes restless, replaying every moment that used to make him feel in control. He starts trying to figure out where he lost you. And here's the beauty of feminine power at 50. You don't even have to say a word. Your silence speaks in ways your younger self may have begged, explained, or cried. You've outgrown begging. Men expect women to chase, to explain, to fix. When you don't, they fall into a psychological tension they're not equipped to handle. Their ego tells them they're desired, but your reality tells them they're not. That conflict creates obsession. But remember, this only works when your silence is real. You can't ignore him while secretly hoping he'll text. That's not power. That's pretending. Real power comes when you are genuinely indifferent to his response. Not cold and free. When your energy shifts from proving to being, he starts to pursue. He may start with small things, reaching out casually, checking in. But the energy will shift. The dynamic flips. He becomes the seeker. You become the prize. And this shift isn't just emotional, and it's biological. The male brain responds to reward uncertainty, a psychological phenomenon where inconsistent attention triggers stronger pursuit than constant attention. Your availability used to be predictable. Now it's a mystery. Mystery makes him restless. Restlessness breeds obsession. At this age, a woman's power isn't in her looks, it's in her presence. A 50-year-old woman who no longer chases, who is self-possessed, who can ignore without bitterness, is magnetic. She embodies what Jung would call the individuated woman, the one who has integrated her inner masculine and feminine, who no longer seeks validation externally. This kind of woman can love deeply, but she doesn't need to. And that terrifies a man who once believed she did. Here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. A man's chase isn't triggered by love. It's triggered by loss. The moment he feels you've stepped out of the space where he could easily find you, he begins to crave that space. He doesn't always even understand why. It's psychological hunger. His ego was used to being fed by your warmth, your softness, your availability. When that disappears, he either collapses or chases. And when a man chases a woman who stands in her power, he isn't just chasing her. He's chasing the version of himself that felt significant in her presence. But here's the beauty of your position. You are not required to take him back. Ignoring a man is not about getting him to return. It's about giving yourself back to you. It's about stepping out of the cycle where your worth depends on his recognition. When you ignore a man the right way, you teach him something his ego never taught him. You are not a supporting character in his story. You are the author of your own. This is not a game. This is a psychological recalibration. You are showing him that access to you is not a guarantee. It's a privilege. And privileges can be revoked. If he's a man of depth, he will feel the shift. He will realize the weight of what he's lost. He will rise slowly, humbly to meet your energy. But if he's a man of ego alone, he will retreat. And that's a blessing in disguise. Because a woman of your worth does not beg the unworthy to stay. This is the secret Jungian truth. When a woman withdraws from a man's ego, she steps into herself, the archetype of full integrated power. The self doesn't chase, the self attracts. You will notice it in how your life feels. Things become lighter. Your emotional energy returns home. You stop waiting for a text. You stop explaining silence. You simply exist. And in that existence, you become magnetic, and he will feel it. The same man who once took days to reply to you will now look at his phone like it holds his salvation. The same man who dismissed your words will now hang on to your silences. Because ignoring him the right way doesn't make you cold. It makes you unforgettable. It's not that he suddenly loves you more. It's that he finally sees you. And maybe that's the real power of ignoring a man after 50. It's not about making him obsessed. That's just a side effect. The real power is that you become the woman he cannot forget. The one who walked away without slamming the door. The one who chose herself without needing his permission. The chase is a psychological inevitability. But your freedom, that's the prize. So the next time you feel the urge to explain your silence, to prove your worth, to soften the distance, don't. Stand tall. Let him feel the echo. Let him face his shadow. Let him decide whether he will rise or fade. Because the woman who learns to ignore with grace doesn't need to chase. She becomes the storm he can't escape. She becomes the mirror he can't unsee. And once that happens, he'll chase you. Not because you begged for his attention, but because you finally stopped giving it away. And that is how power shifts.